Welcome to Folks Around the World. Today, our guest is Angela Shaw, currently living in Toulouse, France. Originally from the US, she's somebody who I admire, who I believe can be a role model for many of us. She has a very unique life experience, and I can't wait to share her stories with you. Welcome to our show, Angela.
Thank you, Amy. So nice to see you again.
I know.
You're supposed to be across the courtyard.
I know. So Angela and I used to be neighbors in Toulouse, France. You're in Toulouse still, and I just moved to Canada. So I'm doing this show. I'm trying to interview people I find inspiring who have stories that are still alive. So it's not just like this happened. It's like this happened and it's still alive, and there are things going on today that you want to share, right?
Exactly.
And both of us, we have similar things in common where we both left the US and have pretty much raised our children outside the US and done our own things abroad. And you are still involved in the US.
Exactly. Exactly. And should I show you what my big involvement, because there's an election coming up. Can you see that?
Yeah, so this is Angela's photo. Put it down, like lower it a tiny bit, and then move it over to your left, other way. There. So this is the Democrats abroad in Toulouse. Yeah.
Right.
So you're involved
in that. So we're getting out the vote for Biden and Kamala Harris.
Yes. Thank you for that photo. Thank you for the photo. Yeah. So before we talk about elections and where the U.S. needs to go, in our opinions, right?
Right.
Can you just share a little bit about where you grew up and what that was like?
Oh, right. Sure. Well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm a native New Yorker. I spent my summers, but let me show you my native New Yorker photo. This is Brooklyn, 1963.
Yeah, now move it forward more. And now move it to your right a tiny, tiny bit. The other way.
No, left, okay.
Okay, the other way. And now back it out a tiny bit so we can see you in the back. Yes, okay, so we see Angela in the back.
That's my 5th grade class in Brooklyn, New York. So you can see there are only 2 black kids, me and this fellow in the front.
Yeah.
He will be gone by the end of the year. And the reason that there are so few black people did not want to send their children. It was a traumatizing experience. And this is in Brooklyn, New York. This is not in Alabama. They didn't want to, I was born in Bed-Stuy, and that photo is in Flatbush. So that's a half an hour driving. It's nothing. I mean, it's relatively no distance at all. And by the time I go to Harvard Law School, the year is, so that's 1963. By 1972, I'm accepted at Harvard Law School. So 9 years from when you saw that photo, I'm accepted at Harvard Law School. Out of 575 students, 7 were black women.
Right.
Out
so
of
how did that?
Out of 575. So in between 1963 and 1972, there were 3 black women. Each year, there's 575. And there are only 3. One graduated, Sheila Rush, in 1965, and she was all alone. And I always wondered, why did you, I asked finally the dean, one of the deans at Harvard Law School, why would you do that to her? And he said, we didn't. We invited 15. All the rest turned us down.
So what was happening then? Like, what happened when you went to school? Did you like change schools?
They hated us. What happened?
So did you come from an all-black school and then all of a sudden you switched and 1 year you go back to school and you're in a completely new school?
When I was, 8 years old, I was taken out of an all-black school and put into that Flatbush school. And that's how my classes were.
So what happened? Like, what could you remember some of? Did you stay there till the end?
I stayed there until the end. So, high school, I graduated from in Flatbush. And in the entire time that I was at school, no parent, my parents were never invited to another family, and my parents never invited anyone to our family. And if you can imagine, when my kids are born and we leave with my daughter, who was 2, to live in China, no less. This is where they don't even have an alphabet like the French and the English. We can have an alphabet and I could write an invitation, even if I can't speak perfect French. But in Chinese, there's no alphabet. There is just a pictogram. And yet we were invited to Chinese families and we invited them to our house. When my daughter was at 2.5, 3 years old, she was at the Montessori school, and the Chinese kids came to our house and their parents came to our house, and we went to theirs. So and that's in China.
I know, that's crazy.
Where we're not, we are clearly, visibly different.
Yeah.
And linguistically very different. And yet somehow the Chinese felt, little kids should grow up caring about each other.
And also the history is so different too. So like when you were going through the basically white schools that were saying that they were integrating, right?
Right.
What were some of the things that happened, and how did you keep going? And how were your parents supporting you to be like, keep going to this school?
I know. Well,
what
that's basically that I have 2 parents who are in the humanities. So if you're going to talk about, people that they're artists. My father was an opera singer. He couldn't perform in the US, so he performed in Europe and in Japan. My mother was a drama theater major. They both were at Howard University, which is the historically Black college where Kamala Harris went. And Kamala is in my mother's sorority. Wow. My mom was an AKA, just like Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison was in my mom's class, and my dad's brother married an AKA. I mean, it's a little club kind of thing.
Okay.
But they were artists. My aunt was in literature and drama, just like my mom and Toni Morrison. So those kinds of people are a little bit more optimistic. Some people would say,
like if you came home from school crying or something, like what kind of advice would your mom have?
Yeah, that's a good question. There was no alternative other than to have to tough it out. I mean, I was gifted and talented. They gave in New York, they have tracking. I think they still do tracking in certain states as well. They give you these exams, and if you are in the high percentile, then they call it gifted and talented. Then you're separate from the larger group of kids.
But were they doing that in the Black schools too, or just in the other schools?
In the white schools, yeah. Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. If you think about it, in 1965, 90% of Black college graduates got their degrees from historically Black colleges, not from predominantly white colleges, not from Harvard's or Yale or Princeton's. They got them from historically Black colleges. The reason being that, well, I'll give you an example. When we went to China, that 1989, I was the chair of the Harvard Schools Committee. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, the Ivy League schools have active alumni. See, it's not enough, like in Europe, once you get the diploma, you don't have to be civically engaged with your university. You just get your diploma, and that was a step, like to check the box, I went to university. No, at the Ivy Leagues, you're in the interview process for the next generation. You want to have a pipeline for the next, so that your university stays at the top of the food chain. So when I got to China and I was chair of the Harvard Schools Committee, and I did the interviewing, maybe 20 students I had to interview who were applying for freshmen at Harvard. And I didn't see a single non-Asian that I interviewed. So like 20 kids, they were all 20 Asians. So I was like, I wonder, this is an international school. And they're European looking kids. Where are the European kids? And I joined the American Women's Clubs. They didn't tell me. I joined the European club, and a Swiss German woman says, "Oh, Angela, my dear, any European child that would have been Harvard material would have been identified by the time they were 12. And we would have shipped them back to European boarding schools. Of course, otherwise their self-esteem would have been destroyed." And I thought about poor me.
Yeah.
All that time, my parents didn't know they could ship me to a boarding school where they would have protected my self-esteem. So everybody knew how important it is to have role models, to have success, to see yourself success. Not just your classmates have to be the best, and your teachers have to look like you, and your environment, your neighborhood and your yachting club and your tennis club, people have to look like you. And when they don't, you suffer, your self-esteem it suffers, which I didn't know. I was just asking. I was just wondering how come I'm at an international school and I don't have any European looking kids, which is fine. I mean, I pushed for all my kids that I thought would, do well. I wrote them up to have them accepted. That's, what I do. But the idea that the Europe whites, because this wasn't just, she was a Swiss German who was nice enough to tell me, but the Americans knew, but they didn't tell me.
Interesting. I'm really interested though to know, like, if you had stayed in an all black school, do you think you would have gotten to Harvard? What would have happened?
Good question. That's a really good question. My children, we'll start with the oldest, Carl. I have 3, and Carl is the oldest. And when my parents' friends, because my parents went to a historically black college, and so their children, some of them went to historically black colleges. So they're friends of ours. So we said, oh, why don't you go and visit? Carl, go and visit this, black college. And he came back so disappointed. He said, Mom, the door is open and they don't see it. They're staying inside, like the Plato's allegory of the cave. Remember, he goes out of the cave because there are only shadows inside the cave. But so Carl could see that it was a cave that the historically black colleges were keeping their kids in. They didn't realize they could go out, not just out into white America, they could go to the world. So he couldn't stay. He couldn't stay in a historically black college. He couldn't stay in an American college. He went to university in Brussels. And then Garrett went to university in England. And then Garrett went to do his MBA in Switzerland. Once you get out, you don't, Jasmine, on the other side, didn't go to international schools, the Swiss, IB schools. She went to the lycée, the French, to the lycée. So for her, she had never been with mother tongue English speakers. So for her, she wanted to go to the US, and she went to MIT to do her PhD. And then she's at Columbia Law School to do her law degree. But it's a difference. She had her whole initial career was in French, in the French system, mother tongue French, like you, French neighbors. It's totally different. It's a multilingual, at the Lycée Fermat, which is the number 4 school in all of France. It's number 1 in Toulouse. um, they're multilingual. The parents speak French, they speak English, they speak German. It's a different, it's not, the US has a monolingual, monoracial outlook. That's the way they are. They have created that. I mean, they were what they call a settler colony. I mean, the people who came settled in that space and they destroyed the Native Americans. Their whole mentality was to colonize and settle in that space. An example of that is here in Europe, our children are dual nationals, right? But they're dual nationals on the two different bases. They're dual nationals from my husband through blood. He's a Belgian, and Belgians give nationality not by soil, by blood. The Americans give nationality by soil. Now, you think, why? Why is this difference between their European? Why would one go by soil? Because one is a settler, colonial power. They're settling. They want to kill the Indians. Their whole intent was to exterminate the other people. So same thing with inheritance. In Europe, a husband can disinherit his wife because she doesn't have his blood. He can't disinherit his children because they have blood. In the US, you can disinherit your children. Your wife is you can't disinherit her. And that's, again, the reason she has to, if you're on the frontier and the father dies, you've got to kill those Indians. That wife has to be able to transact the mission. The mission is manifest destiny. They're going to take that land. In Europe, they're not taking the land. It's an evolved system.
Right.
So it's blood that matters. So my kids have nationality Belgian and European by blood, and they have, because they were born in New York, they have American nationality by soil.
Right.
My grandkids, on the other hand, were born in Shanghai. I was on the plane immediately when they were born, both of them. When they were born, I flew out there and immediately took their birth certificates to the US Embassy because they would be stateless. The Chinese are by blood. They're by blood. My kids are, blood is from Belgium, America, and my daughter-in-law is from Namibia. The kids would be stateless. So the fastest, I knew from experience that the Belgians are a little slower in their processing of passports. The Americans can get that passport. Boom.
Yeah,
So
I've gone through that too. Yeah. But I want to like divert you just a tiny bit because we have these two cultures, American culture, European culture, that we've both lived in, raised our children in, whether they've lived in the US or not. Because of us as the moms, they have the American culture in the way we wanted them to, I guess, you know. But like when you look back at the US and your experience, I'm just wondering, like, you came from a family that was educated, your parents, your grandparents, and my question is, when you're in the US in the 60s, in the 20s, even earlier, in black families, how do you rise? How did your family? Because I feel like it's such an anomaly. I don't think it's that normal, right? It's not so easy. And how does that happen? Like, folks that are able to go to college, graduate high school, go to college and all these things.
Exactly.
Like, how would you have done it, or how do people do it if their parents never have been to college? They're the first ones that aspire to do that. Like, what have you observed is the way to higher education if you're going to live in the US as a Black person?
Exactly. Well, it just so happens the story is told in our US passport. This is my US passport. Everybody can see it, right?
Yep.
And on this page, I think it's 24 and 25.
So move it
There is
over.
to the left, to this
Yeah,
right?
that's good. That's good. Yep.
Okay. The only female that has a quote in the US passport is a woman, Anna Julia Cooper. Anna Julia Cooper was born enslaved in 1858. And she was born in the same place where I have the document from 1866 of my great, great, great grandparents, three greats, being able to marry. Because slavery, the Civil War ends in 1865. In 1866, they go to the marriage authorities of this same county, Wake County, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay, so let's see your face again. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, let's see your face now.
Same, yeah. And they apply to get their, to be married because they couldn't marry. Slaves could not marry. That people don't get either. So they were cohabiting from 1844. So my great-great-grandmother, Laura is born in 1849, something, and they're cohabiting in 1844, so maybe 1849. And then she has my great-grandmother, who I actually grew up with, and I knew she was born in 1871. So it's the community that Anna Julia Cooper and my grandmother and my family is from, and it's called what they called Culture Town. Can you see?
Yeah.
Culture Town?
I can.
Yeah, well, it would be very popular now because there are only 3 communities in the US that have a science background. The first is, of course, Silicon Valley, and then Route 128 by Boston, and then Culture Town, which is now called the Research Triangle, and that's in North Carolina. That's in the same space. So if you can imagine, it's already different in terms of education. Why in the whole US, there's 50 states. Why North Carolina, and why the same area where Anna Julia Cooper and my family is from? Why? Because education has a history there. This is not just random throwing, just throwing the dice. This is a history of St. Augustine's College. That's the college that my grandmother went to. I have the doctor from 1926, she graduates. Anna Julia Cooper, 1924, earns her PhD from the Sorbonne in Paris. Her dissertation was written in French. This is a formerly enslaved woman who did her undergrad here, where my grandmother did.
So how did the city become, so would you call the culture city?
Well, look who's on the back, and you'll see if you can you see at the top this picture?
Can you move it a little closer to us, to the screen?
Oh,
and now down. Okay.
Do you know who that is?
No, I do not.
Did you see the wedding of Meghan and Harry at Westminster Abbey?
No.
You didn't see the wedding?
No.
That's Bishop Michael Curry.
Okay.
He married Meghan to Prince Harry.
Okay. He
is an Episcopal here, it's all connected to this college, this historically Black college that my grandmother went to, that's in Culture Town.
Okay,
that I
so
showed
Culture Town, would that be
it's
considered?
It's not your usual space. There's only one woman in this passport. The only other Black that's quoted is Martin Luther King. So Anna Julia Cooper, from this little, research triangle, North Carolina, she's quoted. No white woman is quoted. This one Black woman who's from that area. So it's not, you have to have community.
What made the community in Culture City so strong that allowed there to be prosperity for the Black community?
That's a very good question. North Carolina did not have the kind of the practice of slavery in North Carolina was by artisans. They were people that learned crafts. My grandfather, great grandfather, was a stonemason. So the reason that he was able to acquire property was his master could rent him out. He was skilled, just like people who were carpenters. It was not like a rice plantation or a cotton plantation or a tobacco plantation. Those, where you have plantations, you have a different kind of brawn. It's a physical labor. When you have artisans, it's more like, you see this? These are bowls for asparagus. The asparagus has its own bowl, not any bowl. These are artisans that are skilled in making, and this is in France, separate villages design their own asparagus bowl. They can't eat after, the Toulouse person can't eat out of the Bordeaux asparagus bowl. These are artisans, craftsmen, and that's the kind of people that were enslaved in North Carolina, as distinct from Alabama or Mississippi, where you could have large, or South Carolina, where you have these large plantations and it was just brawn.
So my next question, yeah, so I'm thinking of all these. So my next question for you, Angela, is, it's always, no matter what, I believe, no matter what family you're born into, if you're Black in the US, I think it's going to be really, really hard. But if you go into the layers of Black community, within your own community, you were considered privileged then, most likely, because you were able to go to the white school. You were able to have parents that were educated. You were able to continue on. And so did that create, what did that create inside you to see, oh, I have my Black friends or whatever that are not going to have the same chance as me? Did that create jealousy? Did that create tension? What did that create? Or
right, that's the difference too in orientation. The Europeans, the Germans, have a word called Schadenfreude. That's not an American word. Schadenfreude means I take joy out of your suffering. That's not a Black American word. It's a German. I take joy. Our words are, to whom much is given, much is expected. We grew up like that.
Meaning there are huge expectations from you because you've been given this.
To support the whole community.
Okay.
When we went from China to Belgium, my father was dying of cancer. So we decided to stop for 6 months in the US and then go on, because we wanted to say goodbye. But we couldn't go to New York because it's not as controlled. Here in this culture town, our family, the college president is a friend of our family. He went to school with my grandmother. We have Jasmine's 4th generation university from my side, from Culture Town. So we went there. But Culture Town had changed in the time that I left the United States. Well, really, it changed over maybe 10, 15 years. I was living abroad and didn't know how it was changing. But my cousin said to me, "Oh, you do have a gun, don't you?" And I was like, "No, I don't have a gun. What are you talking about?" "Oh, it's changed. You can't live in the house that your great-great-grandfather built in 1871, and everybody in the family lived there, and it's still standing. You can't live there because the community is not the same." So I was like, no way. So we're driving from the airport. So we get off the plane from China. We get to North Carolina's airport, and we're driving to this house in Culture Town. And my kids say to me, "What ghetto are we going to? We can't live in this dumpy place." And I was like, What? 1871, your great-great-grandfather built, he was a slave and he builds this and you're not gonna live here. So my husband, the engineer, he gets out a yellow pad and he divides the paper in half and puts the good stuff and the bad stuff, on the pages. And we decide, okay, what are the bad things that we can rectify? And it seemed that we needed a hammer and we could rectify some of the bad things that they had found. So we don't have a hammer, but I have a girlfriend who I grew up with as a kid. We were like 3 years old together. And she lived across the street where we were, just across the street from the house. So I forgot that in the South, if it's in the dinner hour between 6 and 8 o'clock, you can't go to somebody else's house without them feeding you. And I forgot about that. I was not thinking. And I just wanted to borrow the hammer. I just wanted to do, ring the bell. Can I borrow a hammer? And, bye. No. Of course, she's going to loan me the hammer, but she wants us to come in and eat. So in the time it took to eat, couldn't be more than an hour. It may be 45 minutes. Jasmine, who at that time was 5 years old, she is observing what's going on in that house of my girlfriend. The next morning, when we want to return the hammer, we want to take her to breakfast to make a thank you. She gives us a hammer. We want to take her to breakfast at a restaurant. Somehow, my 5-year-old daughter gets my girlfriend alone so where she can talk to her girl to girl. This is a 5-year-old. She asked her 4 questions. The reason I know this is because that was a Saturday morning. By Monday afternoon, 4 o'clock, my girlfriend has come to me and she's telling me, first question, were those babies that I saw at your house your daughter's babies? Now these are 14-year-old girls with babies.
Yeah.
Jasmine said with it, so she didn't want to say, what's she going to say? Second question, well, are they married? She's 5. Are they married? No, they're not married. Well, do they work? Do they have a job? They're on crack. They've been in juvenile detention. I mean, last question. Well, do you let them do just anything they want to do? Because my mother doesn't let me do just anything I want to do. And my girlfriend says to me, Jasmine and the boys will never see her kids again.
Aww.
They will leave
Aww.
North Carolina just the way they came. The world that white America has prepared for her kids will not, on her watch, be the world that my kids will ever have to entertain, not on her watch. And every morning she swept the bullet casings I had already put the kids in the back of the house. I didn't know that there were going to be gunfights, the gangs at night where they're going to shoot and there's all the, bullet things. She would sweep the bullet things away. I had a red car that I rented, never touched. Nobody ever touched me. The boys went to their piano class and I didn't, we had no contact with, the kids were at white private schools out in the suburbs. But in the inner city on Friday, we would go to the president of that St. Augustine's, who graduated with my grandmother in 1926. And in that same class, the first Black board member of Columbia University, he was in my grandmother's class. It's a world that was, in the old days, respected. It was, you don't have gunfights. You don't get pregnant at 14.
But this is the same town that you're telling me was where there were the more educated people, right?
From the 1800s. But
so
see,
that's not the case. That wasn't the case anymore, basically.
That's what I remember. I told you, 90. If the year was 1965, 90% of all Black college graduates would have gone to a historically Black college. By 1980, there was a mass exodus. 10%. That's what it is now.
And what happened to make that exodus?
Because they could go to white schools. So they left the black schools. All these black kids. So I'm guilty. I mean, I went to Harvard, right? I went to Hunter College. I didn't go to historically black college. It's when my son, the oldest one, went to university in Brussels. I went to one of his classes with him. You know, I go to each kid's class. And the book that they had to read was a book called Making It. And the author was a guy named Norman Poteritz. Norman Poteritz wrote Making It in like 1967. He's a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. And the first sentence of the book is, the longest distance that I have ever gone, or that you can ever go, is from Brooklyn to Manhattan. And had I known, I would have never gone, because you can't go back. I didn't know that. And I read that when he's at college. He said, why did somebody tell me? I can't go back. Once you go across from Brooklyn to Manhattan, you can't get back. There's no way you can come back. It doesn't. So I went from then Hunter College to Harvard. And I didn't understand. I didn't get to see that book until, 2002, when Carl was in college. Then I saw, oh, that's what happened.
Very interesting. And what's interesting is, so we wanted to talk a little bit about like what you think needs to happen today. And you were able to leave the US like I was. And I would say the reason I was able to, which facilitated obviously the whole thing, was because my husband was French. So how did you meet your husband? And I mean, because I'm sure you didn't know, like, oh, one day I'll live in Europe, unless that was one of your plans. But
no.
So how did you meet him? How did you meet him? And then show us a photo so people understand, like, what's going on here. So
that's at our wedding reception. Can you see it?
Yes, that's a great photo. So that's George.
That's George. And that's me when I was young.
Yes.
So how it happened was, my father, remember, he was an opera singer, so he had traveled his whole life. So I grew up listening to opera, knowing about traveling. So when I knew that I was accepted to Harvard Law School, my father was just, so thrilled. So he said, would you like a brand new car or a trip to Europe? And so I was thinking, I can drive his car. I can drive his car. I think I could take a trip to Europe. So he says to my mom, okay, you go with it. You go with it. I'm a junior, Angela Junior. So my mom and I go to Paris, Rome, Madrid, and Portugal. Portugal is the last stop. And I'm thinking, and it's New Year's Eve day that we land. So, and then we go to the hotel, I'm thinking, Mom, it's New Year's Eve. Let's ask the concierge to book us at a nightclub. I know we're exposed to rest in Portugal and Lisbon, but it's New Year's Eve. So we asked the guy, we go shopping and we asked the guy to book us. We come back, he says, I booked you at Maxime. So we had been to Maxime on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Mm-hmm. So we figured, oh, okay, it must be the same.
Yeah.
Not thinking that when you go south, the lines are more abrupt. As you go north, because you're going to Scandinavia, it's more equality. It's more, they're not so starkly rich and poor. So when we go to that Maxime's, there are a whole bunch of rich people. I mean, it was just, I was like, and they're old, because they're rich old people. So I was like, oh, darn, this is going to be the worst New Year's of my life. I was like 19 years old. And there were these two young guys at the bar. And one of them was George. So I was kind of looking, because in those days, a nice girl does not, be forward and go and talk to a man like that. So they gave us these Ziploc bags of confetti for when New Year's came, we could throw the confetti. So New Year's came and I felt all this confetti from his side of the room. So I was not going to turn and look at him. I mean, what is he going? Confetti. So the first song they play at New Year's is Stevie Wonder's Superstition. And
Cool.
here I feel this tapping on my shoulder. And he says, would you like to dance? And I turn around and I say, and why are you speaking to me in English? Don't I look Portuguese? And he laughed. And that's how we met. And we stayed together. We went to lunch, dinner. We went to see You Only Live Twice, that movie, James Bond movie that came out. And so when he left to go to India, he was working in Portugal, but he was going to go work in India, and I was going to go to Harvard Law School. But this is New Year, so I don't have to go until September. We were at this restaurant, and they used to have like a little page like this, and you could tear it here. So I wrote my address, and he wrote his address. Because in those days, we wrote letters. We didn't have cell phones. And when we married, 4 years later, because we communicated, we wrote letters for 4 years. He had his piece of paper from that restaurant, and I had mine.
And did you visit Europe like every year? Did he come to see you?
No,
Harvard?
He was on. Yeah, this is how crazy. He was, while I was at Harvard, he came, I think my first year, I get a phone call. I'm in Caracas. It's so close. I thought I would come up for the weekend. I'm in Caracas. So he's going to come up for the weekend. I mean, and then I was going to Marrakesh for a holiday skiing. And he said, oh, I'm in Italy, so I'll meet you in Marrakesh. He didn't show up. Something happened. He had to do business. But, I was there in Morocco. And then when I finished law school, I took a job in Washington, and he was in Bangkok. So I was thinking, well, I mean, are we going to go anywhere with this relationship? And so I called him, and he said, well, I've been reading James Comer, The Black Child. And I was like, James Comer, as I know, is a psychiatrist from Yale, but why is he reading a book like a dummy? I'm not thinking. He's 6 years older than I am. So he's thinking about children. I'm not thinking about, I'm just thinking, maybe.
Are we a thing?
Are we a thing? Exactly. Are we a thing, right? So he says, well, think about it. Maybe you should come to Bangkok. So I have my American Express and my passport. So I figured I'd just go get a ticket. 2 days later, Federal Express, he sent a ticket for me to go out. Here's the Black girl. I'm 23 years old, never been to Asia. I met this man at a nightclub in Lisbon. I will fly from New York to Tokyo to Hong Kong to Bangkok. To meet a man that I met at a nightclub, and he was there. He was there. There was something, that he's not like, well, we were not like these young people today anyway. We would write, it would take a month. I would send the letter, it would get the 2 weeks to get there. He would answer back, and it would be 2 weeks for it to come back. I mean, these young people, if you don't answer that cell phone in like an hour, oh, I texted him an hour ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't get anything back.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't understand that.
I know. So what did your parents think about you seeing him, white foreigner?
Exactly.
Like, were they worried, or they're like, no, we trust Angela's smart, we're not worried? Your dad was already international. Like what?
Yeah, but my dad was not happy. So when we had the marriage in a little church in Washington across from my apartment, my mom came, but not my dad.
Oh.
But in 2 months, he got himself together and he hosted our wedding reception with all of his friends in New York. And as fate would have it, one of the friends who he had known, who our grandparents had been friends, and my dad and they had been friends all this time. His daughter and I grew up together, and she is now the president of Wellesley College. The second Black woman to be president of an Ivy League, and the first Black woman to be president of Wellesley College, which is where Hillary Clinton went to college. It is, and she married an Italian. It's not that, but it is. When you have, it's just like that Swiss German woman saying, if you have a community of people who are like-minded, similar values, then you can, shape them, cultivate them in a certain way. You don't just get, this is the bell curve, 20% on the top, 20% on the bottom, and the rest are in between. That's not by accident. It's by, years and years of seeing this is how you best make an industrial, modern G7 society. It's not sporadic. It's not willy-nilly. I mean, I think the US is probably the most willy-nilly. It's an oligarch. I mean, they have oligarchs, not aristocrats. Oligarchs are just people with money. They don't have, it's not like, for me, to whom much is given, much is expected. That is a part of more of an aristocratic take, but to whom much is given, because that's Europe. I mean, a US is money. I want to profit for myself. I'm going to jump the queue. I don't want to stay in Europe where I have to be in a pecking order. No, I'm going to jump the queue and go beat everybody else over the head. It's a zero-sum game in the US. Whereas in Europe, it's much more, the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. You understand that because you're mature and you know that. Whereas Americans, they don't know, they're quick. They want everything yesterday, and the values are not, they're oligarchs. They go for the money, and the Europeans are aristocrats. They go for service to the community, to the beloved community, to the city on the hill. It's a different orientation.
Yeah, so when we look at I wanted to ask you about, where do you think the US needs to go now, especially in reference to what's going on with the George Floyd, with Black Lives Matter.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
I can see
because I
you.
see something else. But go on.
Oh, I see you. Yeah. Because what's interesting is you decided to raise your children outside of the US. Some of them have gone to school in the US, but they all have this kind of international education.
Yes.
And it seems like that's part of your plan, like, because you said to me earlier, like, let us know, because you said you had more of a your views on how things should be moving. What is that for the US? What do we need to do?
Right. I as I mentioned, it was just 100 years ago. It was 1919 when Tulsa, Oklahoma was on fire. St. Louis, Missouri was on fire. And again, we're with cities on fire because of racial hatred. I mean, it's just absolutely, there's no point in my mind to keep thinking that that's gonna change. The US has made itself perfectly clear about they're not gonna do 20% on the top, 20% on the bottom, and the rest in between for Black people. They're gonna have a large first generation, if they do get to college, but it's going to be a large group that's incarcerated. So every Black person can be suspect. So a guy can, kneel on somebody's knee for the possibility of having a $20 bill counterfeit. I mean, it's ridiculous. You don't do that. And then the other guy, Dylan Roof, who kills 9 people in a church, you take him to Burger King. What? Where is the justice in that? It doesn't exist. So what I was suggesting that we'd start to look at is some of the templates, for example, preserving the Tibetan religion, the Dalai Lama. He had to be taken out of, he couldn't stay in China. They would have killed him. It would have been over. So you have to, I think we have to consider those places from the US experience that generated, like Culture Town, but it's Culture Town is finished. We can't do that anymore. There's no way. But Oak Bluffs still is not what it used to be, but it's still little bit. You know, that's this small part of Martha's Vineyard. I think there's 6, Edgartown, there are like 6 little villages on Martha's Vineyard, and one of them is a Black village, Oak Bluffs. So I think we should consider having an Oak Bluffs in either France, just like the British Pembroke is a British enclave inside France. We have so many British enclaves in this area of the Lot and the Gers and the Dordogne that there are British mayors of those little towns. So I think that Europeans of like mind who want a multiracial society that, you know, embraces and celebrates people punching above their weight. Because clearly, as we talk, how is somebody who was formerly enslaved going to get a PhD in French at the Sorbonne? It's just, what? So clearly she's punching above her weight. My girlfriend, who's selected to be the president of Wellesley College, again, there's 50 states, but it's coming from a small particular group, you know, that just like Anna Julia Cooper, it's a small group that's producing more. So we need to protect that group, which is obviously able to punch above their weight considerably and do it abroad. Yeah, just like, so like we've done for the Tibetans. We've protected them. Otherwise, the Dalai Lama, he would have been destroyed.
But it's such an interesting idea that I've never thought about, because I think, like, coming from Jewish culture, we talk about the diaspora Jews and how there's different communities that are on all over the world, basically. And you're essentially talking about that, like a diaspora African American.
Exactly.
Where there's different types of centers or communities or something where they can be sent out and be like, look, you're going to be able to blossom and flourish and prosper here, because it's not going to happen, or if it does, it's so rare, but it's most likely not going to happen in the US.
Exactly.
US most likely is not going to change. There can be uprisings, there can be people that manifest and demonstrate and say we want change, but in the end, because of the way it's been set up throughout history, the chances are of it actually changing, I mean, it sounds pessimistic, but most likely it's just not going to happen, right?
That's exactly, and it's interesting that you bring that point up, because it reminds me of one of the Black families that I really admire is that of Jane Bond. Her family, her uncle was Horace Mann Bond. He was the president of Lincoln University. Albert Einstein, the Jewish E equals MC squared, who was on the faculty of Princeton, went every spring to give a class at Lincoln University. Again, of all the schools, the historically Black schools, he went to Lincoln University, where Horace Mann Bond was the president. So here is a Black man who is hosting at his dinner table, who is from his faculty, Albert Einstein. It's a Jewish genius who knew what needed to be done. He could have gone anywhere. He could have stayed just at Princeton. No, every spring he would come there. And he inspired so many Black physicists, not that there's so many, but there are a few. James Gates, who's on the faculty of Brown University, wrote the book, Proving Einstein Right. Einstein was just not a scientist. He was a humanist. My daughter, who did her PhD at MIT, she had to choose from three professors who was gonna, she was gonna be supervised by. Mm-hmm. So she had one guy had a Nobel Prize. Another guy had his own Lear jet. And the third guy spoke all three languages. My daughter speaks four, but he spoke French, German, and English. And so they could speak just like that and not know the whole day. And his name was Bob Weinberg. When I first met him, he took me to lunch, and he tells me, I got my PhD from MIT in 1961. What percentage of the class do you think was Jewish? So I said, okay, Jews are 2% of the population, but they punch above their weight, 10%. He said 33% were
Really?
Jewish.
Really?
33%, 1961, 33% were Jewish. So he says, this is now 2011. He said, what do you think the percentage is today? So I said, oh, they still punch above their weight, 45%. He said, 6%. I said,
So things are
what?
going
From
in
33%
reverse.
to 6%? What happened? He said, India and China.
Oh, okay.
And I said, but you can't compare. You can't. India and China, yes, they can score individually, but they didn't have the Enlightenment. They didn't have, you can't, Immanuel Kant is important for the cultivation of Immanuel in the humanities, not in the sciences. You have to have a level of expertise in the humanities. When Harvard selected their first woman to be president, it was a woman named Drew Faust. Her first trip outside the US was to China. And my son, Carl, was living in Shanghai. So I flew to Shanghai to introduce him to Drew Faust. She gives a speech in this big ballroom, probably the Ritz-Carlton or something. And she says, if you wanted to do a ranking, a world ranking of universities in the year 1886, 8 of the top 10 universities would be German. 1886, 8 of the top 10 would be German. What, and this is now 2007, where is the first German university now? 8 of the top 10 in 1886. Now, the first German university is number 51.
Really?
Number 51, that's only one. They don't have 8 anymore. And so she was saying that to the Chinese to say, Harvard understands we will not be number 1 indefinitely. It's not going to happen. You are going to be the number 1 universities. And she says, the only thing I can do is ask you. I can't order you anything. I ask that you don't forget the humanities. That is the key, the humanities. Einstein was a humanist, just like Leonardo da Vinci. He was a scientist, but he was an artist. You have to marry the sciences with the humanities. And fortunately, my daughter knew more than me. When she gets her degree in science from Bob Weinberg's lab, she's doing oncology, she decides to go to law school. And I'm like, what? You know, science, law school. That kid is so daggone smart. She does patent law. She's not going to law school for just anything. She's going there for...
You're out again. Wait, there you're there. Okay,
now I am. She's going to marry. Eureka. Patent law, right, is when there never was a discovery. Now we're in COVID-19. This is not the last time. There'll be another mutation of a virus. She will be finding vaccines and representing, monetizing those discoveries, those science. So she'll always have science and she'll always have justice. And so when George Floyd is killed, she's right there with her legal mind of justice. And again, when my great-grandmother, the one that I grew up with, who was born in 1871, she was an autodidactic. Nobody had been free. Everybody around her, her parents, her grandparents, had been enslaved. She was the first and the only one of her generation not to have been born enslaved. So she had to tell her elders, this is what it is to be free. And that's how Jasmine now has to tell. There's no template for Eureka. By definition, Eureka is never been before. So she has to walk her whole career into spaces that have never been before.
Because yeah, I want to ask you about that, because just like similar to my kids, Jasmine grew up so differently than you.
Yes.
Right? So it's like she's Black, but her dad's white. She grew up in Europe, and
yes.
she has a very high level of education. And then she decides, I want to study in the US. It's like, what is she facing today in the US that you didn't face? Because
I know.
What is she facing as a woman, as a Black woman in the US, but with an international background? Like, she's so unique, right? And
well, one of the things is she's leaving when she graduates next May, and her law firm, she's working at the same time. She's working for a patent law firm, and she's going back to Germany. She's been hired already in the Munich office.
Wow.
So she was there this summer. And she'll go back.
Observations, like when she talked to you on the phone, were there things she was shocked about in the US, or disappointed, or sad, or disenchanted?
Are you kidding me? It's disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. What she has had to look at in the US. But, you know, she has a goal in mind. She wants to get out of there. She knows it's just a matter of now, months, and she won't have to come back. It's just, it's heartbreaking.
She doesn't want to be there.
No.
Okay.
There's nothing
I mean, I don't know what her experiences were. And so,
like, her experiences, it was absolutely, I was there. That's the whole thing. I was there, and I was in that line of to whom much is given. But it was service oriented. Now these people just want to go and make a quick buck. They want to be the lawyer for some basketball player or football player or Beyonce, some gimmicky celebrity. I mean, it's totally different values. They don't have the same. In the Black community, it's different values? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, these are not the same people that were there. Just like my girlfriend said, she will never let my kids see her grandkids or kids again, because the world they have to live in is not that. Right. She knows.
Because
and
so
she
many
knows
people,
that I would never stop.
But so many people think, oh, things are always getting better in the US, but actually it's not the case at all, really.
It's not the case. It's
and
not the case
at all. As you know, somebody who's been trained as a lawyer and looking at the US and thinking we need drastic changes, like extreme changes. And one of them was like, we need to have kind of these diaspora type communities around the world for our American Black population.
Exactly.
But how, as a lawyer, how would that look legally, or how would the government be able to help with that, or how would that be implemented? How would that happen?
I think in much the same ways that we did with the Dalai Lama. They'll have to come to Europe and, you know, make those kinds of the status that we would have to get a special status that would give us, you know, passports, documents that will let us come in, and we would have to have financing from institutions that are prepared, banks that are prepared to take those risks of having. But I mean, we know the British can you know, live and finance their villages here in France, so we can orchestrate that as well. I think it's in the interest, certainly in the interest of Europe, but I think Asia understands as well. They understand what has to be done. They know, as Drew Faust told them, we will not be number one going forward. It's going to be Chinese. That's it. So, you know, we can try to do something beforehand as opposed to waiting till everything collapses. We can try. I mean, the US, they don't want to be with us. That's fine. But Europe and Asia, we can try to to preserve a group that's punching above their weight, unlike the Jews who visibly, unless they told you, you might not know. because, you know, just like in World War II, some Jews thought that they were white. They didn't think that they were different. And so they, you know, 6 million were killed. For us, we're visible. So it gives a different, it's good and bad. I mean, but I think, you know, it's better because you should be mature. This is 2020. We should be mature about what contributions mean. What is synergy? It's not a zero-sum game. We should be mature enough to know that. And I think that the Asians and the Europeans are mature cultures. The US is a new world culture, and they just aren't mature enough to understand what's required anymore. That's just it. They are too me, and you need a we.
So what kind of advice would you have for somebody who doesn't come from a family that's very educated and they're feeling hopeless and they're living in the US and they're from a Black community thinking, I want to get out of here? Like, what kind of advice would you have for them?
I think definitely err on the side of more education. Don't err on the side of just sports and entertainment. That's for sure. And err on the side of travel, of trying to make alliances, study abroad, doing as many study abroad programs, speaking other languages, learning. Now they have on this internet, you can learn languages. Make yourself much cultivated inside yourself. Be a me, as I tell my kids, before you do, be. Be comes before doing. Doing is second, doing. No, being. Create inside, because that'll last your whole life. You know, when I stopped practicing law and I just was a full-time mom, I wasn't just a full-time mom. I was doing my Dems abroad. Here is this New Yorker magazine about our class of women, of our Harvard class. We have been, you know, in popular culture, speaking out all around the world. I mean, I've spoken in the Middle East, in Dubai, in Doha, in China, in Shenzhen. Wherever there's development, Australia, people are interested in they're interested in upward mobility. That's not a dirty word. It's just how it is. It's not by certain ways. You know, it's largely by education.
Yeah.
And not trying to make a quick game, going to Las Vegas and running the roulette thing. No, that's not. So yes, there is an intergenerational aspect, and I think there's a global aspect. And if I had two things, those are the things I would encourage, is this intergenerational. It matters, and global matters.
Great.
Those things.
Well, thank you so much. You have so much knowledge and experience. So I mean, we could have talked even hours and hours more. Maybe we'll bring you on again and talk about something else, but you know, like another niche. Who knows? I mean, we'll see.
Whenever you call, I'm there. Just call me.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.